Welcome back to the Daughters of the Moon podcast. We're super that you can join us for another week. And super excited. We are welcoming back Stephanie James. She was with us on episode 178, and we talked about her other book, When Sparks Ignite. And now she has written a new book, Your Big Fat Juicy Life. And so we are welcoming her back so we can discuss her new book that is releasing on April the 15th. So when this airs, it'll be the day after it releases. So welcome back, Stephanie. We're super excited to have you on the podcast with us today.
We
Oh,
sure
thank
are.
you. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Barb. So excited to be here with you both.
So can we talk about what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's such a one of those wild serendipitous experiences. And really, it was about a year ago. I was interviewing Neil Donald Walsh on my podcast, Igniting the Spark. And we started the conversation and we could not get to the interview. Thank God it was pre-recorded because we talked for about half an hour and we were having this just beautiful heart-to-heart conversation and laughing and sharing these really deep moments. And you just see him, because I do have this recorded, even though we didn't share this part of the interview. You see him just get this download and he looks at me and he's like, Stephanie, you're going to write a new book and you're going to start tomorrow morning. And he said, this book is going to have global impact and I'm going to endorse this book, which he
Wow.
beautifully did and was such a incredible companion. And I used part of our interview in this book as well, because this book, the original title of this book was I'm Dying to Tell You About Death. And it really is a book not about death. And that's why we changed the title to Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After, because it's about life, death, and then our continued life. That death is not the end of the story. It's just the next chapter in our book of eternity. So the next morning I woke up and started writing this book, and I have never experienced my first two books, 9 months each. They were like gestating a baby, being pregnant and then giving birth to these books. And this book came through in a little under 6 weeks. It was
Wow.
phenomenal. Yeah.
That's
Meant to
phenomenal.
be.
Yeah. I just say it came through me. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
It came through me. And then beautiful people came out of the woodwork to be a part of it. Sage Dyer and Marceline Dyer, Wayne Dyer's daughter and wife, are in it. Stephen Simon, who was the Academy Award winning producer of What Dreams May Come, with
Nice.
with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Robin Williams, people that have experienced this, that this isn't it, that this 3D experience isn't all that there is for us. And so, it's packed with my own experience, because I really was very aware of being a spiritual being at about 6 years old. So I really share my own spiritual journey here and experiences of knowing that there's more than just this one life for us, as well as sharing, from Mark Nepo to Ariel Ford, other people that have really had this experience of we are more than just flesh and bones. We are more than just this experience. And when we tap into that, and a big thing in the book for me too was when we befriend death, when we can let go of that fear, we realize we can be more present in this moment and life becomes even more sacred.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So can we talk a little bit about that, about how a person would befriend death? Because I know there's a lot of people that are, super afraid of dying or losing someone that's very close to them. And, how does the world go on, especially if we lose somebody? But how does one befriend death then?
Yeah, great question. Because part of it is, if we think death is the end, then death is the enemy, right? Death then becomes the end of our experience, of our loved ones' experience. And because my own experience and so many of the people in this book, their experience has been being in contact with those that are no longer present,
Right.
that alleviates that fear. I knew very, very early, as I was saying, about 6 years old, that this wasn't all there was. I was fortunate in so many ways because we had a housekeeper who would speak to me about past lives and that she had been taking care of my mom and my uncle for all these lifetimes. So for me, it was like this natural orientation into the world. And if we can allow ourselves to get to that point where we go, oh my gosh, when I did research for this book, 73% of people polled had these experiences with what some people might call paranormal. I don't like that expression. And paranormal just means it's beyond normal. It's not our everyday experience. And the truth is, 73% of people polled said, yes, I've had an experience where I've had a very lucid dream where someone who has passed has spoken to me. I think it was 58% have seen one of their relatives who has passed or a loved one after they've passed or audibly heard their voice. So we know these experiences are out here, but we're so afraid to talk about it. People are so afraid that they're going to be marginalized or, oh my God, they're crazy. And honestly, being in the mental health field for 36 years and in private practice for 18 years, I didn't talk about this stuff a whole lot. So this was a lot, for me to go, okay, I want to bring this out in a book because we need to start having these conversations. And
we did.
Because it controls us, and our fears are what control us. And so again, befriending death, it means, in this book, there's so many suggestions. How do you have a conversation with death? Part of it is we start embracing it as just part of the journey. And when we have these conversations, I love, a friend of mine said, he's like, oh my gosh, they're having death dinners where people are coming to dinners and that's the topic. They're these beautiful, formal, gorgeous meals. And the topic of dinner is, okay, we're going to die. Let's talk about it. Instead of being so afraid. And I think so when we can start leaning into those conversations, that's helpful. When we realize that other people are struggling with death too, we feel like, okay, I'm not so alone. And what if we talked about it instead of making it so taboo?
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. We open up these conversations, we lean into those uncomfortable feelings. And as we start to do that, we can start to say, okay, death isn't the enemy here. It literally is a closing of a chapter and an opening of another. And I have to share with you both. This is very fresh for me also, because Sunday morning, I lost one of my favorite uncles very unexpectedly. I got, that early morning phone call that we never want to get. Right. And, I went through 2 days of being completely devastated because it was so sudden, and again, I want to be really real about this. My original response was no. This is my hilarious uncle who plays the ukulele at all of our holiday gatherings. And we were just all together at Christmas and no. And it was incredible for me that the process, it's not that I don't feel sad about it today. What happens though was by really going into that grief and feeling it and crying and calling girlfriends, calling my family, calling my daughters, and we all talked about it. What I started realizing is there's this piece of how we cling on to wanting the person to be here. It's our loss. But when I could feel into it at a deeper level, I was like, oh my gosh, his soul is so happy right now. My aunt, his wife, who was his absolute partner in life, who, they kayaked through Alaska together. They rode their bikes through Europe. They were these adventurers. I could feel that. I could feel that, oh, that was what he chose to do. On some level, he really just wanted to be with her and died actually almost a year to the day that she passed.
Wow. And that does happen. Well, we're very sorry for your loss, but it is great that you can share that experience because I think that it shows, right? It doesn't mean that we don't grieve when somebody passes over. And, I remember growing up and with my mom, every time she would, one day I'm going to die and you need to know this. And I'm like, we're not having
Mm-hmm.
that conversation because I'm not there. And the older I get, and I guess the more open that I am to learning some of these things, it does become a little more open that no, yes, I do not want her to die. But at the same point, you're right. When you can befriend it and think, okay, this is a natural state of things, you know, with my grandma, like she's getting older, she's in her 90s. And it was funny the other night, I was sitting there and I was like, I have all these questions I want to ask her. And I like just mad wrote, like mad, just didn't even think about it. It was like an automatic writing, kind of a download of all these questions to ask her. And I thought, I'm just going to ask her these questions when I'm talking to her next time because A, it gives me some stuff. And two, if she passes, I have all these great memories that we've discussed then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Kim. I think that's absolutely what part of at the end of every chapter in this book are these take a moment where they have journaling exercises and there's different meditations and there's different things in each chapter to help do exactly some of those things. And that's actually one of the activities is having one of these conversations where you're asking questions and you're just closing your eyes in a meditative state and being clear, getting out of your own way and seeing what comes through. And
Right.
and that's how Neil Donald Walsh wrote, all of his books. His first book, Conversations with God, was him asking questions and listening. And he had a yellow notebook pad and would write down the answers. And that book has sold over 5 million copies. It's been published in 38
Wow.
different languages. It's a listening. And I think so often, we're so distracted that we don't stop and listen. And we don't allow ourselves that space for that kind of connection to happen. So how beautiful that you're already onto that you really downloaded all those questions and let
Well,
yourself just be in that space.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's funny how things come to you, right? But yeah, you think about those things and how we do it. And I think when you think in it that way, like now listening to you, I'm thinking, okay, so that's making me more of a friend with death of, it is inevitable because she is in her 90s, she it could be tomorrow, it could be, 20 years from now, who knows?
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, I think a lot of times in life, we go, oh my gosh, I'm going to die someday. So there's actually this anxiety then around living. And instead of just saying, okay, hey, if I could relax into, yes, I'm going to die and I am not going to know that exact moment. How can I come to this moment though and allow this moment to be as sacred as it can be? And it is as sacred as it can be when we show up with our presence and
Yes.
not with a grasping and not with a like desperateness of, oh my God, I got to do all these things. I got to, it's like, no, because this is ongoing, whether I'm here or whether I'm, in the next life after, it's okay. I can relax
Yeah.
into that knowingness that my soul is going to continue on. And I will share with your audience, it's a story from the book, which I think is so poignant in illustrating this, because these are actual things that have happened to all the people in the book. These aren't fairy tales, these aren't just stories. And for me, one of the game changers, even though I had a very spiritual orientation and really had a lot of awareness as a little girl, I think the lids of my belief system were really blown off when I was 25 and my daughter was 4. And I have to mention my daughter, her name is Acacia. And when we named her that, I just loved the name. But the literal Greek translation of acacia is immortality. It's the Greek word for immortality. The tree of life is the
Wow.
acacia tree. Yeah. So little did I know that she was actually going to teach me about immortality. That was going to be her lesson for me. And this one evening, I was actually, this is before cell phone. So I'm in the tub with this huge portaphone talking to my mom. And the phone call, though, was an unhappy one because my Aunt Gwen, at 46 years old, had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And here we were, even after a mastectomy, a few years later, it had spread through her entire body. And this was the phone call where my mother said to me, Stephanie, they went in today for the exploratory surgery and it's everywhere. So they just sewed her up. They think she's got about 3 months to live. And so I'm crying. I'm in the bathtub crying. And here wanders in little Acacia because she hears me. And she sits on the end of the tub and looks into my eyes and she says, "Why are you crying, Mama?" And I said, "Oh, honey, Mama doesn't want anyone to die." And she just looks at me and she shakes her little head and she says, "Well, we never die." And then I thought to myself, oh, she's, even though she and I didn't go to church, and we didn't talk about God, I thought, oh, she's thinking about, oh, we go to heaven. I said, "Oh, I know, honey, we don't die. We go to heaven." And then again, she looks right at me and she's shaking her head like she was so wise in this moment, so articulate. And she's like, "Mama, there's no heaven." She said, "When I was a light in the sky with God," and then she pauses and she says to me, "Do you remember your other mother, Dorothy?" And I'm just like, oh my God, my other mother, Dorothy, my grandmother, Dorothy, had died when I was 13 years old. And my grandfather had remarried a year after, Grandma Seal. So I had no pictures of my grandparents together. I didn't talk about Grandma Dorothy. Nobody talked about Grandma Dorothy. And yet here's Acacia saying these words, "Do you remember your other mother, Dorothy?" And she said her light was in the sky with God and me. And so God put some of her light in me and I got to come down and be your daughter.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful.
That's amazing.
Yes.
I called my mom and we cried again together. And it was just like, because that's my mother's mom, and it was like, you can't make this stuff up, and that's one of the things, I laugh about and chat about in the book is this is filled with so many stories from people all over the world that have had these experiences and they're so real. And, and like with this, out of the mouths of babes, you can't make this up.
You can't. Well, and that reminds me of the book and I can't think of the name right now, that Dr. Wayne Dyer did, where it was about talking to children who did give their memories of coming into this world and talking about, I picked you. I saw you sitting on the bench crying, and these mothers are like, "What? Like, how did, so they're so wise when we listen to them. And I feel like that story brings a lot of hope to people too, right? That when we pass, we're these beings of light. How beautiful is that, first of all? And second, we're with loved ones that have passed before us, and we can, combine our energies and come back and become a soul on this human plane. I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful message to people.
It really is.
And I think, Kim, that goes back to your first question. I mean, how do we befriend death? We share these stories so that it's no longer something that we have to hold as the number one fear, that people hold. And we can look at death in a different way. It's interesting too, when you bring up Wayne Dyer, it makes me think of the conversation I had with his daughter. And I won't share their story. Their story of being in touch and in contact after he passed is phenomenal. I mean, it really is powerful. But what I will share that was just, again, one of these signs, we have to be open to just noticing them because they're there, let me tell you. And as I'm interviewing Sage for the book, and we're talking about this incredible continued experience with contact with her father, all of a sudden she's downstairs. She lives in New York City, and she's downstairs actually at this cafe that's right at where the gym is, for this particular apartment. And as she's sitting there and we're talking, we get kind of to the end and she goes, "Oh my God." And she just kind of stops and pauses. And I said, "What's going on?" Well, her sister, Summer, had passed had a struggle with drugs and alcohol during her life and had passed, I believe it was just the year before.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're sitting there, she said, the song that my other sister sang at Summer's funeral is playing the instrumental version, which is Cyndi Lauper's I See Your True Colors. She said, but she said, this is a gym. They never play music like this. This song isn't, I have lived here for a long time. This song has never been on here. And she's like, you wanted a sign that there's life after this? She's like, here it is. And we were both, we both just had chills head to toe. It was such a beautiful sign of, her sister going, I'm here with you. I'm here with you too, as you're talking about all this.
And that is a beautiful thing. You had a question. I can see it.
Who, me?
Yes.
No, I was just thinking that I was thinking about when things have happened to me in my life too. Brother passed. God, it's a long time ago. But every now and then, the song that was actually at his funeral will come on. And it's always at a time when either I'm thinking about something that's very serious and I need some answers, sort of thing. And it'll come on radio and I'm like, oh, for God's sake. Thanks, Barry. You've given me inspiration to, keep moving on with her. So it's love when we get to embrace the moments, people from the past, or even something about them, because he has come to me too. And when he came, he was just brilliant. He's so alive and so good looking. And it just showed me that I'm fine. I'm doing good. Better now than I was on the earth plane, right? And that's a real thing. So, yeah. So, yeah, don't be afraid of death.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about, so we befriend death so that we become more comfortable with it, but there's still the grieving process that we go through. So can we talk about a little bit about grief and how we can handle that and get through that and what it means to be in grief?
Yes. Thank you, Kim, for bringing that up, because it's such an essential part of the book and it's such an essential part of who we are. As we embrace our wholeness, it's not about just being happy and being in joy. It's about embracing the totality of our experience and who we are. And so part of that is going to be our grief journeys in our life. And, that's one of the things I wrote about as well, is that, in other cultures and other countries, they celebrate death in very different ways. They befriend death truly in different ways. And also grief is very allowed. Like in Ireland, they wail in the streets when they have a funeral procession. And it's a very outward and communal grief, as to where here in America, I don't know about the two of you, but, and I had incredibly loving parents, but the message was, if you're going to be sad, go to your room. You know what I mean? It wasn't something where it was like, and we're told so many times, it's like, well, when are you going to get over it? It's like, well, you've been sad. I have so many clients that have gone through the death of a child or a partner or a sibling. And they say, people are like, it's been a year. Why are you still sad? And, one of the messages that I have for your listeners is that grief does not have one size fits all. We are each on. Yeah. So when it comes to us, it's an individual grief journey. When my father died, it'll be 3 years ago, in December. I mean, talk about, it was not something that in 2 days I had come to peace with. It is something that I really just struggled with. And so the grief was much deeper. We've all had the loss of relationships in our lives, whether they're friendships or it might have been, just a loved one in some way. And that pain is very real. And so, you think of some of these places where, let's say, Mexico with Dia de los Muertos, and it's a celebration of the dead. And they believe during those days of celebration, the veil is very thin and that we can connect with our ancestors. So it's not, again, death isn't something to be feared. And people can also, though, outwardly grieve. The Lakota tribes, they would cut themselves, they would cut their hair. There was, again, just outward expression of inner grief. I think what is really important for us is not to try to do a spiritual bypass. It's not to try to say, oh, I should be feeling a certain way. When we're in our grief, I think two of the big important components here are allowing what's there to be there, to breathe into the pain, breathe into the sadness, breathe into the grief, and not try to make it go away. If we try to make it go away, it's pushing a beach ball, trying to hold it down under the water, and pretty soon it's just going to pop up and smack us in the face. We have to just befriend and be with what's there as we're with it. That's where it's going to transform. That's where it's going to transmute. The other important piece is to do it in community. And you might have periods of, okay, I'm grieving alone. I need to just be in my room and cry and maybe write in my journal or wail, whatever that is. And then that we do it, though, with loved ones. We talk to people. As I was saying this last weekend, I spent so much time talking with my friends, talking with my family. And even Monday morning, one of my best girlfriends called me from Canada, and I just sobbed all morning before work. I sobbed on the phone with her, retelling some of the stories, sharing some of the things. And, I got ready to go to work that day and I felt at peace. It wasn't that I was like, oh, I can't be sad. And even one of my interviews on Monday afternoon, I showed up on the interview, and as I started to speak, I started getting choked up. And instead of pretending, I said, I just lost my uncle and it's really fresh. And I'm really feeling some sadness about this today. And here's the thing, that humanness then gives people permission to feel their own feelings. To experience their own grief. We're all in this together. This isn't it doesn't have to be a lonely and alone journey. We're all interconnected. And so it's, to me, the way I experience it is almost like an infinity sign. It's like reaching in and then reaching out, and reaching in and reaching out, and allowing that to be at your own pace. I love the book Tear Soup, which is actually, it's a children's book that I say is for adults, because in that book, this woman is making a soup, this tear soup, and she keeps adding these ingredients, and people show up at her house and they're like, isn't that soup done yet? And pretty soon, friends don't want to come over anymore. They're sick of her making this soup. When is she going to be done? And the beautiful thing of the book, it's only when she is ready to have it done, when she has tasted the soup enough that she can say, it's finally done. And that's giving us permission to be exactly where we are at, that no one else can dictate where you're supposed to be. It's really your inner journey. And you'll know when you're at that point where, wow, I've let it go, or I've let a lot of it go. It's okay if it comes to revisit. That's part of what grief's nature is. And so knowing that it's not a linear path, that's why I like the infinity sign, because it's like, we're going to have waves of it. And at times, even during that grief journey, you're going to feel joy. You're going to feel excited. You're going to feel moments where you really feel love, and to allow, again, moment by moment by moment, your experience to be okay. I have so many people that come to my office and say, I feel so guilty because here, my husband died 2 months ago. And I was laughing today, listening to this, funny thing on the radio. Guess what? How beautiful, how wonderful. Give yourself permission to be in the joy in that moment. You're not taking anything away from anybody else. It doesn't diminish how you felt for that loved one.
No, and they'd want us to. They'd want, like, I think and that's one thing I think, when we don't realize is when people pass and they're not in pain and they're, they're such beautiful lights and beings, is they want us to be happy. They want us to be without pain. And, I think I love the message that you're bringing, Stephanie, about being with community, because I know when my uncle died, we all tried to not cry in front of my grandma because it was a really hard time, right? Because it's her son, and, you know, the kids are stronger, but they're still grieving their own thing, right? So you're trying to grieve in this separate thing, and you feel so alienated when you're doing that. And I think the sense of community, to be able to just be like, I need a hug, or I just need to, I just need to sit even in quiet with you, and just whatever it is. I think I love that message that you're giving to people with that. So.
Well,
Yeah.
and one of
Yeah.
the, I think, important messages too that I really heard from Ariel Ford when I was speaking with her for the book, she was talking about when her sister Debbie Ford died, and people would come up to her, up to Ariel, and say, "Well, how are you doing?" And she was like, "How the F do you think I'm doing? You know, I just lost my sister. I'm not doing well." And she said, a better question might be, when we experience someone grieving and we want to be in community with them, there's a couple different really appropriate things you can ask. I mean, we can always say, "What do you need? How can I support you?" Although the person grieving might not know that at the moment. One of the things, though, that I've heard over and over again, and Ariel said, with Debbie, it was so beautiful, is someone saying, would you mind if I shared with you some of my experiences or memories with Debbie? I really, or I'd love to hear some of yours when you're ready to talk about it.
Mhm.
Right.
I know for my pops, who just lost his brother, it was so sweet. It was my 20-year-old niece who's living with them right now, who came from home from work, that day and heard the news. And my parents said it was so beautiful. Here's this 20-year-old. She just sits down, right beside him and said, "Do you want to share some stories about Uncle Dick with me? I'd really like to hear it." And I spoke to my dad a couple of days later. My pops is my stepfather, and he was saying, "Oh my gosh, I felt so, just like, so much joy to share and remember those stories. Like, that was such a gift." So I think,
Right.
it is awkward. We don't know what to say when someone's grieving. And a lot of it is because we don't know how to handle our own grief.
Mhm.
So as we allow ourselves to have those feelings as they arise, to share them with people that are safe to share them with, then we can also invite other people into that when we love them, when we notice they're grieving. And we might open with, if you know that there's a way I can support you, I'm here. And if not,
Yeah.
you know, boy, I remember this about Uncle Dick. If you're open to me sharing, I would love to tell you this funny story, I mean, or whatever that is. And so then guess what we've just moved into? Yes, it's grief, but we're celebrating that person's life. We're celebrating that person's spirit. What a beautiful
Fair
gift.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Don't
is.
you think too that we grieve some people before the actual pass because we know they're going to pass, but because of a sickness or something like that, they've changed. So you actually grieve for before they've even moved on to the other side. So the time they do pass, not that you feel any lighter of the passing, but you've done grieving before and you have a better understanding about
Yes. Yeah.
it. Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying, Barb. This whole thing of that when someone's really sick, my aunt that passed before him, she had Alzheimer's and dementia. And
Right.
so it was so painful watching that decline and watching that shut down, that there is that sense of like you're already grieving the loss of who that person was.
Yes. Yes.
And so then there can be some peace in their passing. And I have some clients that come in and go, "I feel really guilty because I feel relieved right now because it was so horrible." And it's like, what
Right.
if you just allowed yourself to feel relieved? What if you allowed yourself to just be with that? And you could even, you know, Kim, like with your process, you could ask that question to the person that's passed. Is it okay? Is it okay that I'm, you know, feeling this way? You know, and I think most of the times people, when they go into that place and they receive the message, it's, of course, I want you to be, like you said, I want you to be happy. I want you to be
Yeah.
relieved. I want you to be in joy. And
Yeah.
it's okay to be sad. It's okay to have it all.
Exactly. And I think too, when you're sharing these stories too with people, like I know a girl at work lost her brother and, went up and said, I'm sorry to hear about your loss and I'm here if you need anything, if it's a shoulder to cry on or just somebody to whatever, right? I'm here for you. But then she started talking. Then I was getting teary-eyed and I was like, okay, like I almost got really uncomfortable and scared because I was like, I don't want her to think, but I was just feeling so much for her.
Mm,
You could just feel her pain in that moment, right? And it was like, no, afterwards I walked away from the conversation. I thought, no, I think she would have probably appreciated that I was as heartfelt to know, I can feel your pain, right?
yeah.
You
Yeah.
cared.
Yes.
Man.
And how
Yeah.
beautiful, you know, how beautiful that is, Kim, showing up in the present moment, being with an open heart, truly being connected to someone. And I think for all of us, when we feel seen, when we feel witnessed, that helps bring us healing.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes,
You know, it's really powerful.
Yeah. I
yes,
I
it
think
is.
so
Yes, it
too.
is.
Well, we're both really looking forward to reading your book because I think it's going to have a lot of really interesting stuff. And I know some of the stories that you're talking about because I've read some other things and heard the stories, but I'm happy to read them again because they're beautiful, like about Dr. Wayne Dyer, right? Like they're just beautiful stories and shed so much love and light and, hope. So I guess with that, if you had a final message to leave about your book or about grief, death, what would it be?
Well, quickly to speak to what you just said, the stories in here about Wayne Dyer, people won't know. They don't know these stories because they're firsthand
Okay.
from his wife and his daughter and their personal experience of what happened when he passed and what the communication specifically has
Okay.
been since then. So
Okay.
they're
Okay.
really powerful stories of that. Um, and I think one other thing I would just like to just plug in here real quick is the fact that after my father passed, our relationship got better. And so there really is hope, if even if we have a tumultuous relationship with someone, that if we're open to continuing that relationship, once the spirit's out of the body, there really is this beautiful freedom. It's free from its personality, it's free from ego. And when the purity of that spirit comes back and is in contact with you, there's nothing like that. And so I love really quickly, one of the things that's in here is when I was interviewing Marla Fries, who's a psychic who's worked with the FBI and solved cold cases in LA. And I was interviewing her about her book, American Psychic. And at minute 26, she says to me, and this was a month after my father had passed, she said, "Oh, your dad's here." And right as she said that, you can see it right on the video. Like I said, minute 26, this orb comes across the screen, and not just in a
Cool.
straight line or a diagonal line. It like just like went, and it was just like, wow. And we both started laughing. She's like, "Did you see that?" And I said, like, you can't miss it. You couldn't miss that. So my hope is that this book does that. It brings people comfort, that it brings people peace, that it truly gives them the courage to say, oh my gosh, I can befriend death. I can really embrace and embody this sacred life where I have all of my feelings and it's okay. I can be in joy, I can grieve, and that this life isn't it. I want to do this life the best I can, but it's not it. And so that's why this is the book. Your big fat juicy life and everything after.
Love it.
Nice.
Love
They're
it.
very nice.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's important messages and, important messages to know that they're there for us to talk to. And, the more, like you said, the more comfortable we get with it, not that we don't grieve, it just makes maybe the process a little bit more understandable.
That's
Well, and
right.
that we don't feel alone. I mean, I think that's one of the big things in this is that it's really through connection. It's really understanding that we all go through grief. We all go through experience of loss and death. And how do we make this a more sacred experience where we're in community with one another, healing together, and really embracing the totality of this journey and knowing there's not an endpoint. There's not an endpoint here that our
Right.
spirits, quantum physics tells us, the essence that is us, that spark,
Yeah.
it's not born and it never dies. It's energy. And so it just continues to change shape. And like, Acacia said, we're all at some point those lights in the sky. That light still exists within each one of us.
You
That's
bet.
beautiful. Well, she's a guru.
No doubt. No doubt.
It's always good to have those. So no, we really appreciate. So can you tell everybody where they can find your book?
Absolutely. So the book right now is on Amazon. So they can go to Amazon and get that, or go to my website, which is stephaniejames.world. And they can see I have 3 books. I have a film that's out right now on Humanity Stream Plus, and the trailer for the film and all the links, everything's there. And there's in the book too, there's a link to a website where people can start sharing their own stories, and they'll never be
Nice.
shared. They're absolutely in confidence. Um, and but it's a place where they can feel like, oh, someone else is hearing this, and I will respond to every single email. So that's a
Beautiful.
promise.
That's
Yeah.
Beautiful.
wonderful. Well, we appreciate you being with us so much and for sharing your wisdom with all of our followers and with us. And we both really look forward to reading the book. So
You bet
thank
we
you so
do.
much for being on with us.
I'm
Thank
so
you
excited.
both.
I'm very excited for you. You have beautiful things for you.
Oh, thank you, Barb. Thank you so
You
much. It was such a joy to be with both of you, and Barb to finally meet you. And I had just
Yes.
had such a joyful conversation with Kim last time, and so wonderful to be here with you both. Thank you so much.
Yes, and we
Come
would
again.
love
Come back
to have
again.
you back when you write your next one or whenever. And
Great.
everybody else, we will see you the next time.
You bet.